Before the blade ever touched the neck of the woman France had come to despise, her fate had already been sealed. Ending her life wasn't enough. Her identity had to be wiped away, turned into a public spectacle of humiliation. Marie Antoinette, the once radiant Archduchess of Austria who had lit up the halls of Versailles with her laughter, was now forced to walk the path backward from the splendor of a golden throne to the rough wooden cart reserved for the condemned. This isn't a myth. It's the slow breaking of a young woman the world chose to hate. Before the screams, before the blade, Marie Antoinette was just a girl frightened, isolated, and already condemned. Because her execution wasn't the tragedy, what came before it was far worse. In the early hours, while Paris still hid beneath a heavy silence, she was ripped from the arms of her family. Torn from her children, denied even a moment of comfort, she was carried off to the Conciergerie, a damp, shadowy prison, Parisians grimly nicknamed the waiting room of the guillotine. There was no queen anymore, only prisoner number 280. Her new court consisted of rats, sweating stone walls, and 2 guards who stared at her without blinking. Every movement was recorded, every small attempt at dignity blocked. The hours melted into one another, under the constant dripping from the ceiling, mixed with the muffled whispers of other prisoners awaiting their turn. While the revolution howled beyond those walls, while people who once bowed before her silks now demanded her execution, another story was unfolding inside that cell, the story of the woman behind the symbol. A woman forced to face not only death, but a deliberate attempt to crush her spirit before she reached the scaffold. This is the story of what they did to Marie Antoinette before the guillotine claimed her. A story in which humiliation clashed with dignity, and where, in the most unlikely place, she discovered her final crown in the quiet endurance of suffering. Time no longer followed clocks. It was measured by the thud of guard boots and the distant murmur of the Seine brushing against stone. Marie Antoinette lived in a cramped, soaked cell where moisture clung to everything, the walls, the blankets, even her own skin. A pile of straw served as her bed. A single candle became her only companion. A wooden screen half divided the room. Behind it she was expected to dress and undress. But even this faint shred of privacy was forbidden. 2 soldiers stood watch day and night, denying her the right to be unseen. She slept under their eyes. She ate under their eyes. The surveillance wasn't merely control. It was a reminder that she was no longer queen, no longer mother, barely even considered human, just a body under guard. News from the outside faded into distorted murmurs, echoes from a world that had moved on without her. Yet one memory remained painfully alive, one wound that refused to close, the memory of her son, Louis Charles. Earlier, in the Temple prison, revolutionaries had stormed his room past midnight. Marie Antoinette had thrown herself over him, pleading desperately, "He's only a child." Her cries meant nothing. The guards tore her away as the terrified 8-year-old was dragged from her arms. His screams stayed trapped inside her mind, replaying endlessly in the darkness. She would never see him again. Something inside her cracked that night, not the queen, but the mother. Among the handful of objects she hid from the guards, she kept a tiny portrait of her son and a lock of his hair tucked inside her corset. It was her relic, the last ember of warmth in a world frozen by fury. Her only source of human kindness was Rosalie Lemorlier, a young servant assigned to care for her. Rosalie later confessed that the queen only broke down when she spoke of her children. Then the facade of royalty fell away, revealing a devastated mother whispering her children's names like a prayer. Even this vulnerability became a game for her captors. They mocked her, taunted her with crude comments, laughed about her executed husband. Every insult was meant to wound her. Every silence was her attempt to resist. But in that suffocating cell, surrounded by hostility, Marie Antoinette began bending her pain into defiance. She learned to move slowly, speak softly, show no fear. Those watching her expected a shattered woman. Instead, they saw someone who, even stripped of crown and title, still carried a strange, unspoken authority. Sometimes, when the others slept, she stared at her candle's trembling flame. In its faint glow, she replayed her entire life, the grand balls, the embroidered gowns, her children laughing in the palace gardens, and the rising tide of resentment that had been swelling just outside Versailles. When had everything begun to unravel? When had they stopped being people and become symbols of hatred? No answer ever arrived, only dawn, and with it another day inside that tiny stone coffin. Beyond the walls, she heard the city vendors shouting, the distant bells of Notre Dame reminding her that life went on without her, and so day after day passed, dawns without hope. During those long weeks, the woman once despised by an entire nation was stripped of everything that made her human. Yet from that stripping, something unexpected formed, a quiet, almost sacred composure, a dignity that appears only in those who have already lost everything and have nothing left to fear. And then, the cell door opened again, this time not to take a child, but to take her to trial. In the dim hours before dawn, the iron door swung open. This time it was to drag her before the Revolution's version of justice, a justice already carved in stone long before she entered the room. Marie Antoinette was led through the corridors of the Conciergerie, surrounded by armed soldiers. Their boots echoed against the stone like distant funeral drums. She wore the same black dress she had used to mourn her executed husband. Yet her steps remained calm, almost unnervingly composed. The Revolutionary Tribunal, crammed with spectators, looked more like a stage than a courtroom. Flickering torches lit up the judges' faces, rigid and expressionless as carved marble. Across from them, on a plain wooden bench, sat the woman who had once been Queen of France. No jewels now, no crown, only a thin, pale figure with a ghost-like dignity that refused to fade. Prosecutor Antoine Quentin Fouquier-Tinville opened the proceedings with a voice meant for spectacle. His words dripped with malice. He listed the accusations with theatrical precision: treason, conspiring with foreign enemies, wasting the nation's money, corrupting the morals of France. Every phrase drew waves of cheers, jeers, and pounding fists, but no one cared about facts. The revolution needed a villain, and she was the chosen emblem. Marie Antoinette, denied proper counsel and given no time to prepare, spoke only when allowed. Her voice was quiet but steady. She denied the charges not with outrage, but with the exhaustion of someone who already knew the outcome could not be altered. Witnesses filed in, reciting tales lifted straight from hate-filled pamphlets or inventing stories on the spot decadent feasts. Excesses at Versailles. The audience howled with approval. Then came the accusation that froze the entire room. The prosecutor announced the vilest charge of all that she had committed incest with her own son. Little Louis Charles, ripped from her arms months before, had been coerced into signing a false confession. For a moment, Marie Antoinette didn't move. She seemed carved from stone. Then she rose. She didn't look at the prosecutor or the jury. Instead, she turned toward the market women mothers, the same ones who had once marched to Versailles, demanding bread, and in a voice as clear as a bell said only, "I appeal to all the mothers who are here." A wave went through the crowd, murmurs, gasps, even tears. For an instant, the monstrous caricature from the pamphlets vanished, replaced by the truth. A mother torn from her child, humiliated beyond comprehension. Fouquier-Tinville, furious, slammed his fist and forced the proceedings onward, but something had cracked. The trial dragged on, a carefully choreographed display whose ending had already been written. At dawn, the verdict came: guilty of high treason. Sentence: death by guillotine. The clerk asked if she had anything to say. She simply shook her head and whispered, "What more could I add?" Her quiet acceptance became its own form of resistance. That afternoon, she was led back to her cell. Behind her remained the cheers and triumphant cries of the crowd. Before her lay the final morning of her life. Night fell over Paris, casting a deceptive calm over cell number 208. Marie Antoinette returned from her trial pale and trembling, yet her gaze seemed strangely peaceful, not the peace of hope, but of someone who had fully embraced the end. Rosalie offered broth and bread. The queen refused with a gentle smile. "I need nothing more, my child. Everything is finished for me." For a long while, she sat at the small wooden table, watching shadows dance across the damp wall. Then she picked up a quill. Her hand shook, but her script remained steady. She wrote a letter to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, nothing of vengeance or injustice, only forgiveness. She begged that her daughter be cared for, and that little Louis Charles never be held responsible for the words forced upon him. "Tell him I do not blame him. Tell him I pray for him. Tell him that even in heaven I will still be his mother." The letter became her moral testament, her final whisper to the world, but revolutionaries seized it and buried it in their archives, where it remained hidden for more than 2 decades. When she placed the quill down, she stared at the candle, barely clinging to life. Melted wax trailed across the table like falling tears. Rosalie broke down. "Do not cry," the queen told her softly. "We must die as we have lived decently." At midnight, the guards returned with the last order, delivered as coldly and ordinarily as a breakfast announcement. Marie Antoinette only nodded, no plea for mercy, no tremor of fear. She asked for one moment, alone. Kneeling, she prayed not for herself, but for her children. Then she rose, fixed her hair, wiped her cheeks, and waited with eerie calm. Before drifting into a brief sleep, she murmured, "May God give me the strength to die with courage." Then the candle went out. At sunrise, the clanging of bolts marked the end of waiting. On the morning, Paris awoke under a heavy, icy fog. In cell 280, the former queen stirred. Rosalie appeared with swollen eyes and a cup of water. "Would you like breakfast, Your Majesty?" Marie Antoinette gently shook her head. "No. Once I am gone, I need nothing more. My soul has fed enough on sorrow." The locks shifted. The executioner, Charles-Henri Sanson, entered with his assistants. Everything had been arranged down to the smallest gesture, a final ritual of stripping away dignity. They ordered her to remove the black mourning dress she had worn since her husband's death. She quietly asked for privacy. The guard laughed. "There are no queens here." She was forced to change behind the poorly placed screen while they watched. They handed her a plain, rough white linen gown, the color of penitence on the brink of death. Sanson stepped forward. "Your hair must be cut, madam." She bowed her head without protest. Rusty scissors brutally hacked off the pale strands that grief had bleached white. Then her wrists were bound so tightly the rope bit into her skin. She swallowed a sound of pain. Even the smallest human need was turned into humiliation. She was allowed to relieve herself only under their disdainful gaze. When it was over, she paused before Rosalie. "Do not weep for me," she said with tenderness. "I have suffered too much to fear death. God bless you." Then she walked toward the corridor. Guards removed their hats. As she passed in involuntary respect, her presence still commanded. At the main gate waited the open, rough wooden cart used for common criminals. Her husband had ridden to his death in a closed carriage. She was offered up for display. She climbed in, unaided, wrists bound, and for a brief moment lifted her face to the gray sky. "Now my peace begins," she whispered. The cart rolled through the streets. Thousands lined the route, hurling insults and stale bread, shouting, "There goes the widow Capet, the Austrian, the thief of France." Yet what disturbed them most was her silence. She stood tall, white gown fluttering, cropped hair gleaming, gaze fixed far ahead, composed, unshaken, almost serene. Jacques-Louis David sketched her from a balcony. The long neck, the firm jaw, the hollow yet peaceful eyes. Mark it. Women who had once marched on Versailles watched in silence. "She doesn't look afraid," one whispered. "Perhaps she has nothing left to lose." When the cart turned the final corner, the Place de la Révolution opened before her. In the center stood the guillotine, its blade glinting under the midday sunday. A massive crowd roared. Marie Antoinette lifted her chin. In that chaos, an unexpected tranquility washed over her. She refused the offered hand and climbed down from the cart alone. Every step toward the scaffold echoed like the closing notes of a tragic symphony. She ascended the steps slowly, refusing assistance despite her bound hands. As she turned, her foot accidentally brushed the executioner's. She looked at him and said softly, clearly, almost gently, "Forgive me, sir. I did not do it on purpose." Those were her last words. The assistants laid her on the plank. Sanson gave the signal. The blade fell with ruthless precision. Her body went still. The executioner lifted her head by its pale hair. A violent cheer rolled across the square. Long live the Republic! Long live liberty! For them it was victory. For her it was release. Her body was thrown into an unmarked mass grave at the Madeleine Cemetery. No prayers, no coffin, only soil and silence. Yet her story did not end there. That quiet apology to the man about to kill her slowly transformed into a symbol, proof that even in the depths of cruelty, humanity can endure. The guillotine claimed her life, but not her spirit. In the moment, the steel struck her neck. Her dignity rose above the crowd's roar, above the hatred, above her tragic era. In that single, eternal second, she reclaimed her true throne. Years later, Louis XVIII ordered the cemetery searched. Among hardened soil and anonymous bones, remains identified by scraps of white cloth and bound wrists were recognized as Marie Antoinette. They were carried in solemn procession to the Basilica of Saint Denis, the resting place of French kings. At last, the queen denied a tomb, was given one. Centuries have passed, empires have collapsed, names have been forgotten. But in every tale of power and downfall, in every echo of injustice, there remains a whisper. There was once a woman who met the hatred of the world with grace. The blade took everything except her dignity.